Toni Verstandig, Chair of the Middle East Programs here at the Aspen Institute. I hope everyone is enjoying their time here. I know I, for one, can't get enough of each of the stimulating and interesting panels and discussions. I'd like to briefly frame our conversation today before I introduce these extraordinary women, two of whom just have flown in from overseas. But let me frame the conversation along the following lines. If you want to change the world, you must educate girls. And I believe that is our overriding principle, not only for today's discussion, but for what's happening very much in the Middle East. Clearly, educating girls will change the world. This is an underlying message that the film, which will be shown here at the Aspen Institute later this week, Girls Rising, a documentary that was produced by an award-winning director, Richard Robbins. I've seen this film. It is moving and absolutely profound. The featured girls come from several parts of the world, but the underlying theme is that without education, girls in so many countries are sucked into an enduring cycle of poverty, forced marriage, violence, and are never given their rightful place in their respective societies. More specifically, let me address the broader Middle East. In 2002, the Arab Human Development Report was produced and authored by a very close friend of mine, Rima Khalif, who had just recently stepped down as the most senior-ranking Jordanian woman in Prime Minister. She was an extraordinary and frankly prescient in the evolution of this report, because in fact what was laid out in this report is what we are seeing changing the Middle East as we speak. She spoke about the four deficits in the region: the deficit of knowledge, the deficit of women, the deficit of education, and the deficit of economy. Because she saw all too well that in the broader Middle East, these deficits were holding this very precious region behind. They are the underpinning of transformational change, or they are the underpinning of continued instability. So what I hope that we will be able to discuss here today, and that are ideas about addressing these deficits and how we can support the change, and most importantly, embrace the notion that education for girls and the role of women, who are clearly the change agents in respective societies. They are at the nexus of both family and education, because when they are embraced in their respective societies and are given the opportunity for social mobility, they are a clear indicator that their countries are succeeding. We've seen in every global index that has been published, most recently the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Index and the World Bank's Competitive Index, which shows all too often and consistently the broader Middle East remains at the bottom. Because in fact, it's not that each of these countries don't have extraordinary opportunities, it's that the four deficits have not truly been embraced. So for women who are not given these opportunities to be empowered and to embrace their roles for change agents and become true stakeholders in their respective societies, their societies can't really move ahead and become part of this new global economy. Increasingly, we are seeing and hearing from these brave and extraordinarily insightful women. We have them here today with us, and I'm very honored to be on this panel with them. Each and every day, they are putting themselves at risk to advance the proposition that education for girls matters. Yes, it matters. And no bombs, no bullets will keep them away from sending girls to school. These are not just words. This is meaningful. These women are putting themselves on the front lines. As former British Prime Minister Gordon Brown recently said, there is a new movement, not just for emancipation, but for 21st century demand for freedom. And I believe that demand to address the underlying deficits that were outlined in the Arab Human Development Report for 2002 cannot be turned back. Time is moving forward, and change will continue, whether countries like it or not. Women will become and will take their rightful place, because we have young women here on this panel who are driving that change. So let me introduce them to you. Shabana Basij-Rasikh, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
Close enough.
Has just arrived, thank you, from Kabul, literally just arrived, flew directly. And her story is quite familiar to most of us, I'm sure. Under the Taliban, she dressed as a boy to escort her older sister to a secret school, with dire consequences if they were caught. The good news for all of us, she attended high school in America under the YES program, graduated from Middlebury College, and graduated magna cum laude in international studies and in women and gender studies, studied Arabic and Islamic law at Alexandria University in Egypt. She has been very much on the front lines of change in her country. She is leading change, and before we were meeting outside on the deck, she informed me that she has 19 students who came to the States with her. Nine. She is constantly looking at how she can expand that portfolio and platform to have more and more girls in Afghanistan who can be educated. She also started SOLA. She's managing director of the School of Leadership in Afghanistan, a nonprofit that helps exceptional young Afghan women access education worldwide and jobs back home. She is clearly a 20-something who is changing a lot of something. So I welcome you, and we look forward to having you join us in this conversation. Farahnaz Ispahani is a public policy scholar at the Woodrow Wilson Center, and I am very, very familiar with your work and read. She is also a Pakistani politician who has served as a member of parliament and a media advisor to the former president of Pakistan. She is very involved, not only from the outside, from the inside, at looking at the role of women in Pakistan society and more broadly, how you lash up the whole issue of education and embedding those rights in Pakistan society. And when we were outside, again, talking, we were talking about the opportunities that present themselves with the new leadership in Pakistan and how there can be new ideas put on the table to embrace meaningful education in Pakistan. So Farahnaz?
Farahnaz.
Farahnaz.
Farah is fine.
Thank you, Farah. We look forward to having you join us.
Thank you.
Nadia, welcome. Nadia has joined us. She too just flew in from Yemen. Nadia is editor-in-chief of the Yemen Times since 2005. The Yemen Times, for one who reads Middle East newspaper quite actually every day, is really transformational. I think those of us who read the English language newspapers, we don't think, oh, it's just everybody has English language news and it's okay. The reality is, with your newspaper, you are really and your community radio channel and a monthly magazine, an NGO and printing house, and what you're doing to advance and educate a community on the topic of the role of women and education is nothing short of extraordinary. Yemen is also, I think, not as well understood by those of us in this room. A lot of press attention in America is clearly given to Pakistan and Afghanistan, less so to Yemen. So I think that it is, you come to us at an extraordinarily interesting time, and I thank you. So allow me to turn over to each of you for some remarks, and then we can engage in some Q&A among ourselves and save some time for our audience. So may I ask you, Shab, to begin?
Sure. Well, it's a great honor to be here today, especially with both of you on this panel. I want to start with saying that when you read the news about Afghanistan, please keep in mind that it comes from a very specific lens. To be quite honest with you, even during my time here as a student, I would get most depressed about Afghanistan because of what I read here in the US, that being my only source of information. But when I am back in Afghanistan, the reality of the country is so different that even after Afghanistan suffering so many years of war, there are so many opportunities for all of us, especially for us young Afghans, to see hope for a bright future in Afghanistan. And that is honestly why I decided to go back to Afghanistan when I completed my education. As you look at the country, please keep in mind that Afghanistan has gone through 30 years of continuous war. To put it in other words, can you even imagine the United States going through 30 years of continuous war? Would you be sitting here today? Perhaps not. So when it comes to women's rights, opportunities for women, girls' education, even though in so many ways, not surprisingly, the illiteracy rate for women in Afghanistan is 90%. It is because of these years of war, not because people in Afghanistan don't support education. That may sound like a big statement, but I strongly believe that because of my own experience growing up in Afghanistan, because of the parents of my students who to this day struggle and fight so many obstacles in the country to make sure that their daughters have a bright future and access to a great quality education. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Farah?
My background is a little different. I have worked on education from the point of view of being a lawmaker and legislator in Pakistan's parliament. And as a Pakistani woman politician, I've traveled all over the country and been to schools in the rural areas, in the urban areas, etc., met with parents, and especially the parents of girl children. So I have also, the women in Pakistan's parliament, the last parliament was the first time that we had ever since Pakistan was created in 1947, the first parliament that continued 5 years of a democratic term without a military dictatorship. And then we had interim government and elections, and now we have a second democratically elected government. That is a huge amount of hope, because what democracy does is it opens up societies, it opens up voices, and the people who were the have-nots in a totalitarian setup have a chance to become part of the haves. So this is a huge thing in Pakistan. And Afghanistan, of course, next year we'll have elections. We hope that that helps our two countries work closer together and get rid of the military mindset, which has harmed both our countries so much. The topic of today's event is raising girls in the Middle East. And I would actually call it raising girls in the Muslim world. Because a lot of things that exist in the Middle East or the Arab world also are being faced by women in Indonesia and Malaysia, being faced by women in Pakistan and Afghanistan, are being faced by Muslim and non-Muslim citizens of Muslim majority countries. And I as a Muslim and a Pakistani citizen, a citizen of the world, do feel we need help from others but we have to fight the fight within ourselves as well. We have to be the change makers. Because up to now, when, for example, the Kerry-Lugar bill came to Pakistan, and it was the first time America ever gave a completely civilian assistance bill for education and healthcare. And it was rejected, and those of us who supported it were called CIA agents. So things like aid and help and support have to come in, I think, different kind of packaging now. So I will just, so I don't take too long, I think the greatest challenges right now for young girls in these countries are, number one, culture. And that means, for example, in Pakistan, Turkey, and all over the Arab world, you have honor killings. And women are, young girls often, very often, 12, 13, 14, 15, are killed to save the honor of the family. In countries like Egypt and all over North Africa, you have female circumcision, which still exists today and is done to tiny little girls. That is culture, but we have to accept this is our culture. Good or bad, you have to accept yourself. In Egypt, another statistic, 96% of married women had undergone female circumcision as little children, little girls. And this is meant to make sure they have no pleasure in sexual intercourse and that they stay within, they are therefore controllable. When we come to education, there's access to education in rural areas. Young women in rural areas, like the northwest of Pakistan, where the Taliban now has a great hold, they have been blowing up girls' schools. We keep building them, and they keep blowing them up. But like Malala Yousafzai, who we are so, so proud of, she is the product of a very conservative area, who chose to educate herself, had a family that helped her get educated. And she is a living testament that among the women in our part of the world, there's nothing, we are the hope, I hope. I think later also then obviously girls go to school much less than boys, number one. And then also there's a big difference, like in Egypt, where the Coptic Christian community, girls within their communities go to school far more than in the Muslim communities. So these are all things, these are the challenges, and we can come to all the positives later, but I just wanted to generally lay out for all of you what the cultural hindrances are to girls' education.
Very helpful, Farah. Thank you, and stimulated a lot of, I know, good questions. Nadia?
Well, being the journalist, I'll tell you two stories. First story, and they are real stories. First one, I think happened around 6 years ago. And my friend, she works, she has a psychology center. And she said she came across a story of an older Yemeni woman who did not know how to read or write. And this woman was saying, I wish I had more information, I wish I had more education, I could have saved my son. And the story is that she is a widow, and she has, her oldest boy is 15, was 15 at the time, and she wasn't very aware of how to interact with him as much, and he would go to the mosque or would go with friends and stay for hours, and she did not know what he was reading. And then one day he came to her and he said, Mom, my friends showed me pictures of very beautiful women and said that these are your brides in heaven. Now, for me, it would all automatically raise an alarm, brides, heaven, do you intend to go in heaven soon? And as an educated woman, I would consider something is wrong. But she said, okay, good luck. And after a few days, he just vanished, and she hadn't heard from him. And now later on, she heard stories that he had gone with the jihadis and things like that. And she regrets it very deeply until today, and she said, I wish I had knowledge. I wish I knew more. And it's not just about her, it's about her friends. I mean, obviously this mom would have told her neighbor or the other mom, and the other mom who's... So we're not talking about an incident. We're talking about a society of, let's say, mothers who are not very equipped or have information. Now, and the other story is about Bushra. Bushra in Yemen, or in Arabic, means good news, the name. So I'm going to tell you good news. Bushra is a Yemeni woman from a place called Hajja, which is a remote area. And there the girls don't get much education, but she decided she wants to go to school. And the story is that she was very good in school, and she went to the 7th grade, and she came up first in her class, and she ran home and she said, Daddy, I'm first in my class. And he's like, you're still in school? He didn't even realize that she was still going to school. And he said, no more school. That was his reaction. And so she fought the war with her family, and she went secretly to school until she finished high school. And then it was time to go to college, and she decided, I want to be the first girl to go to college from my village. And what she did is that she talked her father through this, and he said, no, I have no money, there's so much shame in it. And she said, about money, I'm gonna raise funds. So what she did is that she taught the little kids in the area, in the village, for little money, and she raised the money to the trip to go to the city. She had to get an ID card, and the ID card meant that she can register in college. So when she raised enough money, and he said, no, I can help you get the ID card, because in Yemen, this is another thing about education, and I don't know if it's the same in Afghanistan or Pakistan, women cannot get their own ID cards alone. Like if you're a citizen, you're a human being, and you want to have an identity that says who you are, you cannot just get it. Your father, your husband, some male guardian has to testify like you are who you say you are, and then you can get the ID. So it's as simple as identity. And then this girl said, okay, we'll just do the ID card for now, no college. And obviously, she had plans, different plans in mind. She got the ID card, and she waited for 1 year. And the next year, she said, okay, now it's time to go to school, to college. And he tasted money. Then the father realized that his educated girl is able to generate income into the family, because she would teach the little kids in the neighborhood and put some money into the family. And she said, listen, if I go to college, I will even get more money. And so that was the idea. She had an incentive for her male guardians or surrounding in the family. And it was a win-win situation. Now she's studying in her 3rd year in college. And she's trying to raise some money for her education one way or the other, some non-profit organizations helping her and so on. But I believe that we have so many Bushras in Yemen. And these girls are, as Farha was saying, the hope. They are the change agents. And we need to encourage more girls. And not just education. What do you do with this education? You get a job, you become economically independent, you become aware, because it's not just, they don't teach you in school to be concerned if your son tells you he's being shown pictures of his brides in heaven. But that comes with the package. So education is not just the formal education, it's awareness, knowledge, exposure. That's for
Nadia, I think you touched on a number of themes, and let me ask our 3 panelists. So what I heard you all say is there is a culture in this broader majority Muslim world that creates challenges. But in order to address those challenges, we need to look at an enabling legal framework that embeds not only the rights for women, but this notion of a knowledge base, of access to education. But you also touched on the issue of how do you incentivize a broader community platform. And I happen to believe very strongly in the role of public-private partnerships, because I think it's a new model, a model that helps sort of get away from the Kerry Lugar, which is the US government, here I am going to tell you what to do with your education. And Ambassador Haqqani earlier in the day said, you know, while we're very appreciative of so much much U.S. aid in Pakistan, it's very difficult. Why do you have to tell us what kind of education structure we should have? Let's work in partnership. We have something we can bring to the table. But my final point, and I'd like you all to address in my questions is, so what I heard you say, when women are educated, there is a known, you get a real valid return on investment. So they are then put into the workplace where they can actually generate income. So I'd like to hear all of you, I'd be interested in you addressing these 3 points and how do we move on that, that broader platform to actually get what I call stickiness, so that your work will be grounded and won't be easily overturned.
If you don't mind, I would like to actually address a couple of points that both Farahnaz and Nadia raised. One about the biggest problem or number one problem in our part of the world being culture. And the second, actually, an example of a girl who, despite her father's resistance to her education, fought for her rights. The other side, in my perspective, well, I may have a rather different perspective, and I hope I'd love to hear your opinions on that. But I think part of let me take a pause to say, 2 weeks ago, I read in an Afghan newspaper that the female parliamentarians in Afghanistan were being threatened by their male counterparts to say that your days in parliament is over. And I want us to think why all of a sudden the same colleagues who didn't say such words to them a few years ago are now able to say that. And I guess that's because of the approach we have in terms of girls' education or women's rights in our part of the world. We blame it in the culture. It is culture, it is culture. I mean, let's for instance, take a closer look into Afghanistan. The fact that 90% of women in Afghanistan cannot read and write, I don't blame Afghan culture. I call that a problem. We've been through 30 years of war. If you go to a rural village in Afghanistan and talk to a community and ask them, tell me what your problems are, they will tell you lack of access to road, they don't have healthcare, they don't have a clinic, they don't have water, they don't have school. They will list all of these. But if you ask them to prioritize their needs, the number one thing that they may ask you is a health clinic or a road that connects them to the provincial center. Education comes in the bottom. And that is not because they're not supportive of education, but because they look at education as a luxury that they cannot yet afford. And because of that, I see hope that if there are more possibilities and opportunities for us to bring education also to the top so that they can afford that luxury, then we can look at it as a problem, not as a culture. If you call it a culture, you all of a sudden create an opportunity for people to look at this as men fighting versus women, or women fighting versus men. In fact, when we talk about women's rights or girls' education or their access to education, we have to have an inclusive approach. We have to talk about it from a perspective that benefits the person, the individual, her family, her community, her society, and the country and the world at large. And by doing that, we don't get men in the other side to say your days in parliament is over. They will not have that opportunity to say that. And let's talk about, I will talk about a different role that fathers play. It started with my own. During Taliban, when I went to secret school and I could not see hope or any future for myself or for women in Afghanistan, I wanted to quit. I would say, what is the point that I go to school, walk an hour every day, and know that if I am caught by the Taliban, I could get killed? What is the point for me to take all these risks when I know there is no future? It was my father and my mother and my amazing mother who would sit me down and say, you can lose everything in your life, everything you own. It can be stolen from you, you can be forced to leave it, but the one thing that will always remain with you is your education. It was their encouragement. You know, and I see that in my students. I have students who come from very conservative parts of the country to attend my boarding school in Kabul. And most of the time, it takes that supportive father or a brother that looks at them and say, yes, you go ahead, and I will fight whatever obstacles that people in the village may want to create for you. To give you an example, a few months ago, and I talk about this example because it is so representative of what these fathers in that kind of society fight for these girls. A few months ago, one of my students went home for a holiday break. And her father picked her up at the provincial center from the airport, and they were driving to their rural village home. On the way, both of them missed being killed by a bomb blast. And when the father got home, he received a call, and the person saying on the line, how come you are still alive? I was planning your funeral. If you send your daughter back to school in Kabul, we will try again. Can you imagine what the father said? Well, he immediately says, kill me now if you wish, but I will not stop my daughter's future because of your stupid or backward ideas. If my fate is to be killed in your hands, go ahead and try it. My daughter is going back. Well, the daughter came back to Kabul, and she was one of the 9 girls that I accompanied a few days ago to come to the US. He came all the way from Helmand province to see her off at the airport and to remind her that what she's about to embark is not just for herself. It is for Afghanistan, it's for the future of other women in her village, in the country. So you look at that girl and who says to me, he says, you know, if my father is ready to risk his life for my education, I will make sure that I work so hard and take this education back to help my people. So we need to, and I will make this, I promise I'll make it short. We need to make sure that we invite men, brothers, fathers, husbands into this conversation and make it an inclusive cause. Make sure that it's not a fight that only women fight. It is a fight that everyone fights. Give them ownership. Exactly. Give them a platform to speak and support women. That's how you will, if those men in the parliament then say your days are over, the rest of them will look at him, what are you talking about? That doesn't exist, and we need to change that. And because of that, for us women from our part of the world, we need to also make sure we are very smart about how we talk about our rights. When we talk about it in a global setting, we need to talk about it, let's address this problem. But when we're talking within our own country, with our people, we can then be more critical and say, yeah, tell me it's not culture. Tell me this is not what's happening. And if you are keeping that difference between framing it as culture within your own people and challenging your own people, that may have a different outcome. And when you're in a global setting, my biggest problem is that our female parliamentarians then, instead of coming back to our own society, our own women and men to say, why are we being told that our days are over? They go to an international or a Western journalist and sit down, our job is at risk. That's not how we should handle the situation. Thank you.
So Farah, being a parliamentarian yourself, I would be very interested in your perspective. How do we multiply this notion of inclusiveness?
I think I do not agree philosophically about saying one thing at home and saying one thing somewhere else. This has been the problem all along. If there's a truth, you speak that truth. If there's something you're aiming to do, do it. But speak the truth. Own it, right? So what I will stand up and say in Parliament in Pakistan, I will say the same thing here. If I get death threats from the Taliban there for speaking up for the rights of the Shia communities and the Christians and for people with blasphemy laws, my colleagues have been killed. I have been to too many morgues to even begin this story, but one still has hope. But one has to be honest. Mm-hmm. Now, when you say this about these female parliamentarians, I can't talk about another country and parliamentarians from somewhere else. But I'll give you what I think is a very positive example. We had in Pakistan a law minister who was completely against any laws for girls, for education, girls' education, health clinics for women, and women's empowerment in any way. He believed the Sharia, the Islamic code, covered all these things, and they didn't have a place in the legal system. Well, I believe in development, you have to work bottom up, which is from girls in education from the rural areas and from the poor areas in the cities, etc. But there's also top down. And if women in leadership positions don't do what we did, we ran rings around our women's caucus in Parliament, which is non-partisan. It had women members from Islamic parties, it had women members from left of center parties, it had centrist parties, women from every party represented. Each of us worked within our parties and managed to get from behind this gentleman support. We gave a little here on another bill, we gave a vote here to get a vote here. We worked, that's the process. That's the process. So we managed to pass this asset control bill, which, if you've seen the movie that Sharmina Obaid-Chinoy made, in fact, I was one of the people shown voting for that bill, and the women's sexual harassment in the workplace. For example, we're talking about education for girls and getting them into the workplace. But if you get them into the workplace and then they're sexually harassed to the point where after a week they leave, there's no point to it. So all I'm trying to say is I don't agree or disagree with you. I feel it has to be bottom up and top down. And I feel we have to work, yes, within family structures, because fathers and brothers can be the most positive. But we also have to realize when we're dealing with men in Parliament or in the workplace or in schools who are not our fathers and brothers, we have to know how to deal with them too.
Well said. So Nadia, I'd like you, there you sit, you're a journalist, you've heard these comments. How do you use your voice to influence change in Yemen and to enhance this inclusiveness and to bring change not only to support education for girls and this whole broader legal framework and platform? What are you doing on the ground in Yemen? How do you see what's happening today in a Yemen context? And flash forward for us, where do you want to be, in the, let's say, Aspen next year? What would you report back? Where would we be?
Would I see you next year?
With great pleasure, we'll have you back.
Yemen is in a crossroads right now. We are planning our future. Something I think, I don't think any other nation has had this opportunity, like people sitting in a room representing their entire country and trying to plan out what their vision of a new Yemen is. And and 1/3 of these people are women. So that's good news. I think, touching on the comments that we heard, it has to be a win-all situation. This is it. What's in it for the man? What's in it for the woman? What's in it for the parliamentarian, for the country? It has to be laid down clearly. Positive stories, role models, champions. We need those so that we say educating girls is not going to help only this girl, it's going to help this community, it's going to help this country, the economy. I mean, Bushra's father was converted, and he's now promoting for girls' education because he realized it's a good thing. It's the misconceptions that we have, whether culturally or economically or even politically or legally, that if we put barriers, like the thing I'll use, the circumcision, female circumcision example, like you think that if if women are not allowed to be excited, I'm not sure I'm saying the right words here, but that they will be loyal or faithful, I don't think so.
I think so.
Okay, so my point being is that it's not the limitation. It's not. Don't try and say, okay, we put boundaries on women so that they don't get into education, so that they're more controlled. No, we have to explain to the entire society and the world at large that this is a good thing, and this helps you directly and your neighbor and the country in general. And doing that through media, we do it in our radio. And it's amazing, but I think people want to see tangible stuff, like immediate stuff. And if you say, I'm going to sell you a dream in the future, maybe they will not be converted immediately. But this is why we have to have immediate interventions, like the Food for Education program. I think World Food Program had done meals in schools. I don't know if you've heard of this. This was very successful. And if you have any certain programs that make it not a cost, so sending your girl to school is not going to be a cost, things, scholarships, networks, the boarding school, Shabana's boarding school needs to be supported, so please support her. And when we do one in Pakistan and Yemen, please support us as well. And I think opportunities, linking and making a difference through one person at a time, but eventually that person will, it's a ripple effect, help the entire people around him or her. And I believe in the power of a collective support, not just men or women. It's not them versus us. And this is basically my message.
Extraordinarily well said. Well, I'd like to leave some time for questions from the audience. So please, and if you could identify yourself, and there's a microphone. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Damani Eubanks. I'm a Bezos scholar. And my question is, how big of a part does Islam itself play in the current state of women's rights in the Middle East? Do you think it's a more Islamic problem or a more Arabic problem, like with the culture? A question to all the panelists.
Okay, let me take that. It's a matter of control. It's not Islam, or, I mean, it could be given any name you want. If you look back, I suppose in America, maybe 100 years, or you guys know better, it was something similar. It's a matter of domination and control. And empowering women through education, through economic opportunities will change this drastically. So just labeling it is not a good idea.
I would second that. I think that those of us who've read anything about Islam, as in the real Islam, versus this Salafi Wahhabi Islam that is now blowing up girls' schools and killing Christians and Shias and Ahmadis in Indonesia and in Pakistan and all of that. That's not Islam. Those are political movements and movements for power. So we have to separate these two things. I'm proud to be a Muslim woman, but I'm not proud of those people. They've hijacked my religion.
Very well said. And I think part of the reason why education and the right kind of education and the quality education is so important is because people will then become aware of their rights. There are very few women who actually know that it's specifically mentioned in the Quran that education is a must for a Muslim man and a Muslim woman. It's very, very specifically mentioned, so that there is no even room for interpretation that, well, by Muslim we mean Muslim men. And that kind of understanding comes with the right kind of education. One of the problems right now in our countries is that our educational system is so underdeveloped. You go everywhere and you see programs and public schools that are based on rote memorization. There is no room for creativity and innovation. You cannot be coming out of that kind of system, be critical thinkers, analytical thinkers. You're not allowed to ask questions from your teacher, and that is very dangerous. So in a place like Afghanistan, where we are right now at a critical juncture of deciding what the education opportunities are going to be like, given the illiteracy rate in the country, we have to discuss the quality education. We have to focus more on that. We have to make sure that it's not misunderstood as allowing people to convert out of religion. In fact, it's anything about or in favor of religion. And that is really where, I mean, for instance, my work at SOLA comes in that our students go to public school, but public schools are 3 hours a day. And they spend most of their time in my boarding school where their education is supplemented with other, with critical thinking, a lot of exposure to reading and writing, where they will learn that what is happening, to distinguish between what is practiced versus what is said in Islam. Yeah.
Yes, please.
My name is Aykan Erdemir. I'm an anthropology professor who is now in the Turkish Parliament as a legislator. I would like to first congratulate the three brave ladies here for their wonderful work, who have reminded us that culture is not a monolith. Culture is historical, it's contested, and it's fluid and open-ended. And I'm sure all of us here in the audience are wondering what we can do to kind of assist in your struggles. And I think we can begin by making sure we get your message that there is no single patriarchal conservative culture that legitimizes the existing injustices, and that there are contestations addressing those patriarchal interpretations. And if we give you the space, if we provide you with the ability to contest culture, I think then we can begin to move forward. Because I also, I think, suffer the same problem in my own country, where we do have religious conservative politicians trying to curb on women's right to education, just like the latest bill we had, which it tried to introduce homeschooling at age 9. I know homeschooling is a different debate in the US, but in Turkey it meant girls could be sent back home at 9, so they could be married at 9, which we fought in the parliament. It was physical. We were beaten in parliament, but it was worth it, because now homeschooling can start at 13, which means we gave women or young girls 4 more years to get education before they could be forced into a marriage. So I think what you need on our end here, from the audience perspective, is for us to stop thinking about culture in these monolithic, never-changing, ahistorical, like a singular culture, which is often advocated by, as you said, radical Salafis, whose own version of culture is, in fact, a very, quote-unquote, modern, meaning newly introduced, invented culture. And just, I would be delighted to hear your comments on this issue.
Thank you very much. Please.
Well, to begin, Afghanistan is a very young country. More than 70% of its population is 25 or younger. And that's probably because of war and because of one of the highest maternal mortality rates in the world being in Afghanistan. But that means there's so much hope for change, many, many opportunities for young people to be agents of change. And you're right, it will be a big mistake to look at culture as never changing. In Afghanistan, I think, because of this 30 years of war, young people for the very first time have lived outside of tribal structures because of the war. And being so young, that means there is so many room for opportunities and change. And if you think about it as an entrepreneur, if you're a true entrepreneur, Afghanistan is your destiny and your dreamland.
Farah?
Just speaking to a point, that bill is outrageous, and I just find it quite disturbing, and especially in Turkey, because so many of us look up to Turkey as the model. one of the things that hasn't been addressed really, and I think is crucial, there are tons of organizations on the ground in all of our countries, like in Pakistan, the Citizens Foundation. Non-profit, well-to-do entrepreneurs or business people or professionals. They build proper schools. They have a different curriculum. And these are the organizations which all of you can help to support in some way. Each one of us, who in Pakistan would educate one poor family's kids, you change their lives. And when you're willing to pay for the girls' education, for young girls' education, often they'll let you do it because it's not costing them anything. And in a way, the sort of way China had that one-child policy, that you actually got incentives for having one child. The state would help you. Right. So if you incentivize it for families, for the girls to go to school, however you do it, whether through foreign aid assistance or directly with schools and families, that is really the way to go. But what needs to be changed above all is the curriculum. You can go to school. Your school can be a brick building, it can be a mud hut, it can be under a tree. If you see the curriculum in most of these countries, in Pakistan, hatred of Hindus, hatred of Jews, the military is the most wonderful institution which holds it all together. Completely erasing so much of our history, so much of what makes us who we are. And I've seen this in many, because I was working on curriculum reform in Pakistan. So I've looked at school books from other countries. So it's not just the schools. It's the books that they have in the schools, and that's the nub of it. Because you have that book, even if the girl at 9 is sitting at home reading that book. That's what you have to do.
The deficit of knowledge.
Learning math as a young child, 1 gun plus 1 gun equals 2 guns. It's dangerous. It's the mindset that you, from a very young age, you... Yes, seriously.
Nadia, did you want to comment?
Well, I thought there were more questions.
Yes, there is. Yeah. This young lady over here has been very patient. Please.
Hi, my name is Umalima Matlokhan. I'm a Basij scholar. So I live and go to school in South Africa, but I've lived in different countries in Africa, and we still have the same problem of educating females. And I just turned 16, so most of the problems that are happening are to girls who are exactly like me. So I was wondering, what can I take as an individual in spreading this to the rest of girls my age of how to solve this problem? And how can we, in different countries and different continents, collaborate and try to solve this issue together?
Good question. Nadia, why don't you start?
I have a daughter, she's 7 years old. So listen to your mom. I don't know if I'm saying this the right way, but there are things that people in more advanced countries take for granted. And for example, education. So, and I've heard stories from friends of mine in more developed countries who are really sad that their kids are not going to school or not doing well in school, not interested in the education and building a career and things like that. They waste their times. And I think what you could do is that you could tell your peers that although you come from South Africa, but you've been privileged to be able to study in other countries, and is spread the word of appreciating what you have among your peers so that you become role models for the next generations. I mean, don't forget that there are girls in other countries who are not able to even go out of their homes, and you get to travel. So I know this sounds cliche, but maybe the parents here will agree with me. Just appreciating and thinking more seriously about your life and how you want to build on this, and reaching out to, through the network, maybe through Facebook or whatever, to people who are less privileged, and spreading the hope and responsibility. And that don't take things for granted, and push it into the future. And I think another point I want to talk about is technology. We haven't talked about that. We talked about outside. There are two things. One is that apps have made it very easy to communicate and to learn and interesting, interactive. And the other thing is that you have to have the smartphone to be able to use the WhatsApp, you know. You have to have the electricity to charge your phone. You have to have the internet connection, the 3G, to be able to. So it's not just a phone. I mean, if everybody here around the room bought a phone for somebody in Afghanistan, it's not going to help, because you need to make sure there is electricity, there is an internet connection, there are people who know how to use these applications. So I suppose what we could do is that we can push the technology and into the countries that are receptive. I was told that you guys, your countries are like, everybody has a phone, even the farmers.
Not everybody, but a huge percentage, and women in rural areas.
So this is an opportunity.
We set up rural banking, and so that only they can access their bank accounts for when money from, we have something called the Benazir Income Support Program, which is for the poorest of the poor, a certain amount of money every month, which only goes
that
directly.
woman can, yeah.
Yes, and she has to access it. Nobody else can.
And
it's all done via the mobile phone.
We're still going behind. I mean, there is an opportunity in those two countries because the infrastructure is there relatively. So you can support by, you know, girls all around the world can push in and say, okay, let's connect, let's provide, let's support. Countries like Yemen, we're still behind. We're still facing electricity problems and obviously access to the internet, only 4% of the population. I was shocked in the previous session upstairs when they said 15 years ago here in America, only 3% had access to internet 15 years ago. So, and we have it now. In Yemen, it's 4%. Like, do we have to wait 15 years? Hopefully not. So I think programs that support technology to be accessible and
Thank you for
available.
bringing that up. Kathy?
Sorry, one more thing that I think you should come this evening to watch Girl Rising.
Yes,
You will get a lot of ideas from that, to see how women who haven't even left their countries fight injustice and do something to change not only their lives, but the lives of other women around them. And the fact that you're here, you're already a privileged person, and that becomes your responsibility to help other women. And then actually allow more people to believe in the multiplying effect of investing in girls' education like yourself.
Kathy?
I was just going to follow up on the Girl Rising thing, because once you see this film and you hear the different stories, which are expansions of your own personal stories, you are so motivated to get involved and engaged and there are ways to do it. You could be hosting a screening. You could be having it shown at the college that you attended. You could get involved in maybe having it shown by someone overseas where they're trying to have 500 different events. There's the International Day of the Girl in October. There's all kinds of events relating to education during the International Day of the Girl. So this gives you something realistic to really do relating to this whole issue. And it also makes it very clear that once a girl has an education, she has much fewer chances of having an early marriage. The incidences of rape are less. Her economic opportunities are much, much larger. And her health care opportunities are much bigger. And it then has the multiplication effect in her entire family and her community and her region. So it's an incredibly powerful film, and you were right to bring it up.
So thank you, Kathy.
Can I,
think-
one
yes.
quick thing?
Yes.
I would like to introduce the man in this room, Richard Robbins, who's the
Ah,
director
yes.
of
Wow,
this
Richard.
movie. And I'm very happy to know Richard, such a committed man. So here you
So
see
Richard,
a man
please,
behind
we
all
have
that.
to give, yes. This movie, Aspen, our Middle East programs, one of our partners is Intel. We do a public-private partnership, and this movie is extraordinary. I thank you, Kathy, for reminding. I started in my remarks, but to sum up, it is an extraordinarily moving movie, but it also is a call to action. So today, I'm afraid we do have to wrap up. And in a true Aspen fashion, I think that it's not just ideas that we're talking about, but we are lashing up ideas with action. Each one of us do have roles and responsibilities, not only to ourselves, but to embrace these extraordinary women who are risk takers, who are agents for change in their societies. And Shabana had reminded me July 12th is Malala Day. And so on the eve of Malala Day, as we look to the role and the extraordinary power of educating women, I hope each of us can do something in the coming days to leave here and to actually operationalize an idea and to support you all. But I can't thank you enough. It was an extraordinary conversation. Thank you.